It seems that not even a single day goes by without hearing about some kind of action or decision made that places a double standard against white Americans. They seem to be piling up against us at an alarming rate, so much so that they've become the norm in American society, and even all across the Western world. From as simple as the quality of education we receive, or how the tax code is designed, to as dire as not having access to the potentially life-saving medications and vaccines, these sort of policies and practices, without any pushback, are becoming more and more normalized. And as that happens, they increasingly seep into our daily lives. These policies, and those responsible for it, dictating to us how we can live our own lives, essentially enslaving us to the will of the colored masses. Our country putting foreigners first and natives last. And the natives? They seem to not give a damn, especially for their children, and what kind of country their children will grow up in. White Americans either encourage this sort of blatantly targeted discrimination, or just keep quiet and look the other way. This reality was once more highlighted for me by a couple of recent events that occurred over the past couple of months. My initial reaction was to just shake my head in disgust and move on, as we know all too well of just how common these sort of occurrences are. But when the ironies and coincidences between these two events began to pile up on each other, I couldn't pass up the offer to share them with my people. I believe they perfectly demonstrate the double standards we face in this country and their broader implications. One of them took place in the state of California, and the other in the state of Kansas. Both involved a student, and both transpired on a school campus. With that said, starting off with the event in California, a student attending La Jolla Country Day School walked onto campus wearing the Make America Great Again hat. The school's 2020-2021 student handbook states that hats are allowed on campus, even hats that contain political themes, and could be worn anywhere on campus except in the classroom. The student wearing the MAGA hat was in full compliance with the school policy surrounding hats on campus, as stated in the handbook. But despite that fact, sometime later on during that day, the student was stopped by the head of school, Gary Cron, pulled aside and given a stern lecture about why wearing that hat is wrong and why the student should remove it. Cron later sent out an email to all the parents about the incident, stating, quote, "The student now knows what the hat symbolizes and why not to wear it, and has agreed to comply with my request." End quote. To further add to the humiliation of the student, his mother replied mentioning that she was fully embarrassed at her son's decision and behavior, and said she would, quote, "fulfill her role as a parent." What an effort to tear open a fresh wound that was never there, and never needed to be there, and pour salt into it. After controversy began to surround the scandal, Cron decided to double down on the measures he took to handle the situation in a video that was released by the school board.
A student came onto campus with a Make America Great Again hat. He has every right to wear that hat. I had friends give their life for that right. It was not a political decision to reach out to him and talk about that hat. It was a decision about dignity, the inherent value that all humans have. When I approached the student, I shared with him that he had that right to wear the hat. I also shared with him the impact it has on our community. That hat has a symbol of racism and hatred. We could argue about whether that's true or not, but it's a fact that in our community, there's a belief that that's what that hat represents. And because we're a community of dignity, that all people have value and that all people are vulnerable, I wanted the student to know that his decision was going to have an impact on people.
The man talking so highly about dignity, in an academic setting I should emphasize, is the same man degrading the intellectual dignity of his school by shutting down political expression, and by extension, free thought. He claims that nothing is more valuable than the First Amendment, our right to free speech and free expression. But I guess that's only when free speech does not contradict his speech. he virtuously states that his decision was not politically based, but was rather for the dignity of the school community. But he then goes on to claim that, quote, this hat is a symbol of racism and hatred. What is that but only politically based? Gary Cron, claiming that the hat is a symbol of racism and hatred in watered-down terms, is him basically making it known that he disagrees and takes offense at the political messages or ideas that the MAGA hat conveys, and therefore does not want those kinds of political ideas in his school. I don't know this for a fact, but if the head of school goes out of his way to shut down the political expression of a student, a right that is not only protected under the Constitution, but also protected under the student handbook, then I can confidently assume that La Jolla Country Day School has the same left-wing stranglehold on its academic curriculum as well. As for what this means for those that wear MAGA hats, i.e. Trump supporters and white people in general, expect the public support for this president to plummet, even among conservatives. Expect the hat to be purged from society at a rate faster than the speed of light. Even though this hat was despised from the start, it was still, quote-unquote, tolerated to an extent, because the man who created this hat was serving as the president at the time, so the hat's relevance and impact was unavoidable. But now that Trump is projected to lose the presidency, so too is his hat expected to lose both cultural and political relevancy as well. In just a few years' time, the MAGA hat will become a vile relic of the past, associated with hate, division, and of course, white supremacy. I can safely predict that anyone who wears the MAGA hat 4 years from now will be met with reactions comparable with the sin of wearing the swastika. It will just be considered another white people thing. And we already know that anything upheld by white people is racist and evil, and must be driven out of society. On the other side of the coin, about a month earlier in the state of Kansas, the Junction City High School experienced a similar incident on its campus, except in this case, the narrative was reversed. It was reported that a Muslim girl wearing a hijab was asked to remove her head covering by a hall monitor as she was walking down the school hallway. Once again, according to the high school's own student handbook, students are prohibited from wearing a number of pieces of clothing, among them being head coverings of any sort on campus, which also, of course, includes a hijab. When she refused to comply, she was then sent to the principal's office, who subsequently sat down and had a talk with her. A couple days later, the principal sent out a mass email to the entire school community to address the controversy. Not even 2 weeks after the incident, on November 3rd, Sasha Dent, a spokeswoman for the Geary County School District, which runs the Junction City High School, announced that Melissa Sharp was being suspended from her role as principal of the high school and was being replaced with an interim. All this for her grave mistake of adhering to and enforcing the school dress code. Soon afterwards, the Kansas chapter for the Center for American Islamic Relations, or CARE Kansas, stepped in on behalf of the Muslim girl at the center of this whole manufactured crisis, and released a message concerning the issue, stating that, quote, "We will closely monitor the investigation, but strongly believe and demand that the Junction City High School and its school district must examine policies to determine if changes must be made to prevent such incidents in the future. All district personnel, especially school administrators, should be offered diversity training on the right to religious accommodations for students and staff, and the proper way to enforce the district's policies." End quote. In other words, do more to enforce diversity at your school, and do more to accommodate Muslim students. And, of course, the district bowed down to the orders of Islam, and showered the entire school, from the janitors to the administrators, with, quote, robust diversity training, active community engagement, and more education of different cultures and beliefs, end quote. As if we didn't already have enough of caving to other cultures. Just more white kids sitting through more self-hatred in the classroom. Now take a moment to imagine this. Imagine if the Center for Saudi-Christian Relations was created in a place where Sharia is law. Imagine if this Christian body looked out for the interests of the thousands of persecuted Christians in the region, cried out against rampant Christianophobia, and not only hoped, but demanded that the fundamental Islamic schools change their school policies just to accommodate a handful of Christians attending their schools. You can't imagine something like that happening, can you? And if that ever did happen, you would probably see Christian students hanging from the rooftops of the school, and concerned Muslim parents attempting to storm the Christian center and taking its members hostage. As for the Muslim girl wearing the hijab, if she wants to wear her head covering in public or open spaces, then she has that right. I take absolutely no issue with that. That's how it is in this magnificent country of ours. Our laws guarantee the right to practice one's faith freely. But if she enters an area or an institution that is lawfully within its rights to set up and maintain its own standards, then she must observe them to the fullest. If the student handbook clearly states that there are no head coverings permitted on campus, then that's the end of it. Of course she's allowed to question their rules, but in the end, the school reserves the right whether to change or keep their policies as they are, and should not be pressured by CARE Kansas or any other organization outside of the school district. If the girl and her family really takes issue with the rules, well, that's too bad. She should go find another school more fitting to her expectations. I'm sure she'll find plenty in California. You see, it's people like this that come to our land and use their American privilege not to contribute to our economy and our society, as our politicians promise us every time a new batch of immigrants set foot on our shores, but to denigrate and fundamentally transform this country. This Muslim student should be on her knees, thanking Allah that she's living in and receiving education in America, because I would be the first one to throw ungrateful foreigners like her on a boat and ship her back to where she came from. But putting that aside though, I want my viewers to take notice of the ironies between the two stories and their broader implications. These events took place in two vastly different parts of the country, both literally and figuratively. The state of Kansas is a pretty heavily white-dominated state, making up 76% of the total population, for now anyways. California, in contrast, is essentially the entire world mashed up into one territory, with white people making up only about 37%. These two states couldn't be further apart from each other. But California, a state that is comprised of all the colors and is no friend to us, is able to shamelessly enforce the culture and policies designed to protect the people it now reflects, the colored folks, but to disparage us. Meanwhile, Kansas, a mostly white state, is not only unable to defend its people and its way of life, but actively engages in tearing them down, and welcoming Islam by wrapping a hijab around its head. So why does this happen? Why do white people cave so easily to other peoples and other cultures? What does this say about us and our own culture? Well, simply put, we have no culture. White people have no culture. As harsh as that sounds, that is our present reality. And what brings me to say this? Because a people with a proud and dominant culture would not permit other cultures to hijack their system and set it in its own favor, and in turn, take over their land, their laws, their institutions, and their own culture. And if things continue to carry down this road, don't be surprised if one day you're punished for not getting down on your knees and bowing before the Islamic call to prayer, as it rings out from the school mosque. What transpired in those California and Kansas high schools last month is a bitter paradigm of what is happening to America. And as America ties that piece of fabric tighter and tighter around its own head, it will end up squeezing the very life out of itself. We as a community, as a people, need to start awakening ourselves to this blatant anti-white reality. We have an obligation towards ourselves, and even more, towards our children, to start making noise and pushing back against these kinds of double standards and other forms of discrimination, which are specifically designed to cripple our very livelihood. We must put an end to our dead stares at our enemies as they nail our coffins shut, and finally bust ourselves out of there. Because if we don't, we will be helplessly trapped as we are forced to hear the cries and screams of our own children as they suffer the same fate.